Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the China Summit 2020. I'm Andrea, Vice President at GCC NUS Chapter, and I'm honored to be your MC for today. On behalf of the organizing committee, we would like to express our heartfelt appreciation to all of you for joining our summit. We hope the 2020 GCC NUS China Summit will be the platform for Singapore's university students and young entrepreneurs to gain a more holistic understanding of the emerging Chinese market. China Summit 2020 consists of 3 sessions, namely technology and innovation, finance and investments, and the new normal. In each session, we will hear from our distinguished speakers talking about exciting experiences and insights that they would like to share. To kick off the event properly, I would like to invite Xu Jia, President of GCC NUS Chapter, to give us a short opening address. Over to you, Xu Jia.
Our distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to the 2020 NUS China Summit. Thank you all for joining us on a Friday evening. My name is Xu Jia, and I'm the chairman of Global China Connection NUS Chapter. After decades of breathtaking development, China has evolved from isolation to become a pivot in the international arena. And as a result, both the importance and complexity of Singapore-China relationship escalate. Under such circumstances, youth as the future backbone of the society are in a pressing need to be able to navigate and comprehend the various challenges and opportunities emerging. As a non-profit student organization, GCC NUS engages Singapore's tertiary school students, young professionals, and entrepreneurs with those from the rest of the world in the context of Singapore-China relationship and the existing and potential opportunities and challenges that Singapore and China are facing. NUS China Summit is an annual event that we organize. For this year, we're so fortunate to be able to invite 3 prominent speakers to the summit, sharing the topic about the technology and innovation. And I'm just as excited as you are to learn from their priceless insights and experiences. Before I finish, on behalf of GCC NUS, I would also like to express the greatest gratitude to our speakers, the organizing committee, and most importantly, the audience today for making this Festival of Ideas possible. Please enjoy the 2020 NUS China Summit. Thank you.
Same excitement here, Xu Jia. Thank you. We hope you now had a better understanding of Global China Connection as an organization. Without further ado, let's kickstart the session for today. And our topic for today is technology and innovation. For this session, it is our pleasure to have 3 brilliant speakers to share with us their experiences and insights. Our first speaker will be Mr. Sam Al-Schamma, CEO of Smart Solutions International and Director for Regional Education Sector, Intel Corporation. Over to you, Sam.
Hello, everybody. Let's see if I can, as a technologist, if I can get this technology going. First of all, I'm honored to be part of this session here. Can you tell me if you guys are seeing anything?
Yep.
Okay. So just a bit of background about myself. I started with Intel. I've basically been in technology since the late 80s with American Express, and then with Intel. I started with Intel in 1990. At that time, Intel Corporation was the place to be. It's like, I guess, I don't know, Google or Facebook these days, or TikTok. And I started as a software engineer there, and got to basically grow through the ranks and also move around the world, working at headquarters in Silicon Valley for over 10 years, and then moving to Europe and Middle East, So I switched from engineering and marketing to business development and sales and marketing, managed Intel Middle East, and then came to Asia, to Singapore, to manage our education sector. Those are all big business for Intel. And throughout the years, I've been fortunate with Intel to visit over 60 different countries and see the progression of how technology went in different countries. When I was asked to speak here, I tried to put myself in your shoes and think, okay, what can I tell you that you probably haven't already heard, or maybe put it in a different context. These days with internet, I'm sure everything I'll probably tell you, most of it you've heard, but maybe not in the context that I'm putting it. So what I would like to talk about is technology companies and how they started in Silicon Valley in the US, and how over time it moved to China, and now it's moving beyond China, and the opportunity for you guys maybe as it moved east, and then as it moves in the region. So I'll cover a few things. I'll just talk about the high-tech industry then and now, where it's at now. And I will touch on innovation in China, specifically in how I've seen it. And it's been a learning experience for myself. By the way, I should have mentioned, a few years ago, I did an MBA with INSEAD and Tsinghua University, and I had the opportunity to frequently go to China for my MBA. And it was just eye-opening for even somebody who's been to so many countries, being able to see what China was able to do in a very short time. It was just impressive. And I have some, hopefully, lessons to share with you. And then somebody who's been in corporate for almost 30 years and then went entrepreneurial, I'd like to leave you with just a few thoughts and ideas to share with you about as you study and as you finish and consider becoming an entrepreneur, things to keep in mind. So most of you know technology. Most of it started in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is a part of California that's basically between San Francisco and San Jose, about 10 million people population now. And it started in the late 60s, 70s, but then really picked up late 70s, 80s. And what made Silicon Valley so special and what attracted a lot of tech companies to Silicon Valley was the industry and the combination of industry and academia that were there at the same place. Most of you probably don't realize, but a lot of the tech companies initially were driven by the defense industry. Defense industry had a pretty strong hold with the Air Force and NASA and others in Silicon Valley, and they basically were funding a lot of those projects. And then you had, of course, some of the top universities in the country, including Stanford and Berkeley, and all of those had a strong science background, of course. And the mode of operation that you would see at that time with a lot of those companies would be what I would call a kind of garage mentality. You see that picture here with the birthplace of Silicon Valley. Anybody can, well, I don't know if you can do that. Normally I would have asked you, I said, anybody can tell me what garage this is or what company started here? And that's literally a garage in somebody's backyard, but this is HP. So HP started basically here. And then you look at some other companies, Apple, as you might know, and a lot of those companies all started in this garage mentality where, and I would say in a few cases, it's college dropouts. I don't want you guys to consider just dropping out. I always say for every successful college dropout, there's 1,000 successful entrepreneurs who completed college. But basically that was the mentality, a small task that people are getting together. At the end, they have an idea that they pursue. And the idea a lot of times is a solution to a problem. So for you, as you might consider entrepreneurial ideas or projects, always look around you. You don't have to look far, but look around you. Look for problems that need solutions and look for pain points that people have, and then try to come up with a solution for that. Or if you look at, for example, China, and we'll get to that a bit later as well, China probably was not the place where a lot of the innovation started, but they're excellent at scaling. And scaling means going, from one to n, and that's where is the other opportunity. So you're either looking at, I'm going to come up with something new, or I'm going to take something and make it better, faster, cheaper. So that's basically Silicon Valley and how it started. And then over time, in the late 80s and 90s, while I was in Silicon Valley, we started seeing the whole outsourcing movement and going east. And at that time, it was call centers, and then software development in India and other places, and then manufacturing, scaling the production in what we called at that time emerging markets, countries that were low-cost labor. And a lot of the tech companies thought, no harm in just sending out some of the kind of low IP, low intellectual property, just kind of mundane work. So we will just ship it overseas. With Intel, for example, the silicon manufacturing, the actual manufacturing of the processing happened pretty much all in the United States. And then when we expanded, we went into a place like Ireland, which is a kind of a low tax region, but also high tech area, or Israel. And Intel outsourced what we call the packaging, which is not, it's still high end to a lot of high tech as far as other companies. But it's basically once the processor is done, the silicon is done, it basically you put it inside a package. That was basically outsourced first to Malaysia, and then went to other emerging countries and into China and others. And so basically you were looking at the, I would say, the low tech part of technology going into emerging markets. Because they needed to scale, we had the whole .com growth at that time that was driving growth of a lot of tech companies and the need for technology. Most of you probably weren't born at that time, but all of that continued to drive the need to scale. And countries like India, China, later stage, Thailand, Vietnam, and so on, Malaysia, position themselves as the countries to go to for scale. And what China did very well was they did that and started with that, but then continued to get better and better at material manufacturing and product manufacturing until they became world leaders with it, and where you couldn't even compete with them anymore. Foxconn, if you know the company that makes the iPhones, they were basically just an ODM. They just make whatever you tell them to do. But you look at them now, a lot of the technologies that comes to phones and high-tech consumer devices comes from people like Foxconn. Intel's chairman, he was CEO before that, Andy Grove, he passed away in 2016. He was a true visionary and a driving force behind the growth in Silicon Valley. He, in early, no, actually close to like 2010, he warned the industry. He said, you guys are giving out your advantage. And by letting the scale happen outside of Silicon Valley, he said Silicon Valley is basically giving away their technologies. And he felt that without scaling, not only do we lose jobs, but we also lose the stronghold on technologies, and ultimately damage the capacity for innovation. That was in 2010, and he was spot on. If you look at technologies now and how much innovation is coming from Silicon Valley in the US compared to the rest of the world and China, he was completely right. And I'll give you a case study here. Intel versus TSMC. TSMC is a Taiwanese company that they specialized in just producing processors. It's what we call a foundry business. And they got really good at manufacturing processors. Intel all along was if you think about it, if you can see here on the right side of the chart, there is this, oops, sorry. There's this chart on the right side which shows the scaling of nanometer. Nanometer is basically the thickness of the lines of the transistors inside the processor. Today's processors are so advanced, basically in the, like a pinky in a fingernail, you could have billions of transistors on it. And the way you do that is you make the lines smaller and smaller, basically the lines connecting. And the thickness of those lines is measured with nanometers. And when I was at Intel, we were talking about, 200 nanometers, 100 nanometers. We went to 90 nanometers when Pentium processor came out, and we thought we were so excited. And Intel was always 1 or 2 generations ahead. So when we were at 90, the rest of the industry was maybe at 180. And we kept on going all the way till 20. But somewhere in the last few years, companies like TSMC overtook Intel. And those of you following technology news, Intel last week, when they announced their earnings, their stock took a dive, a 16% dive in one day. Because basically they said, we're going to outsource the manufacturing of our processors or high-end processors to TSMC. Not high-end processor, but basically the 7 nanometer technology, because Intel until now couldn't do it, while TSMC has done that. TSMC is already at 5 nanometers, and they're talking about 3 nanometers. So this is where somebody has gotten so good at it and basically outpaced the original manufacturers. So that's something to always keep in mind, that as you scale, you're also getting better, not just with scale, but with the technology. So now let me shift from Silicon Valley to innovation in China. Let's start with smart cities. Smart cities, there's a lot of talk about smart cities. Anybody calls smart city. A recent report of top smart cities would have included things like Singapore and Brussels, and but also some Chinese cities like Shanghai and Shenzhen and others. And in China, the smart city market is over $1 trillion market. It's a huge market. And it's driven by companies like Alibaba, who already basically trying that out in their own backyard. So the advantage that Chinese companies have is that they have a huge market to try out. If I'm an entrepreneur in Singapore and I want to try, and I have a product, I want to try it out, my initial market is a few million people. But if I'm in China, my initial market is 1 billion people. And when you're looking at smart cities, when you're in Singapore, that's the one smart city you have to cater to with your product. In China, you have dozens of cities like that. So Alibaba, for example, have an initiative called City Brain, and that already is used to optimize traffic in Hangzhou in their own backyard. And they're using technologies like Internet of Things and GPS and cloud and AI analytics and 5G, and they basically can identify the hotspots in traffic, and areas that used to be congestion areas now are just moving, simply because the systems and the software and hardware that they're using can help control the lights and traffic lights and the traffic. It is part of a bigger initiative of digitizing and informatizing cities in China, and basically having information about everything and everybody. And obviously people have concerns about that, about privacy, about surveillance. It is what it is, but you also have to look at it that it's actually contributing to those cities becoming safer, more efficient, and better. And I'll get to that later, but for example, even in the case of when they were trying to control the outbreak of COVID-19, they used some of those technologies to get a handle of contact tracing, etc. And then China is always good at exporting back what they have. So they're already exporting some of those ideas via the Belt and Road Initiative. Some of you probably have heard that. Going to other countries and saying, we can help you with the infrastructure, with the communication, with the smart cities. And they come and plug in companies like Huawei and others to drive those technologies. and create business for them. So it's a very nice, fulfilling cycle. And then I'll give you another example on electric cars and autonomous vehicles. Most of us know electric cars as Tesla, and autonomous vehicle. A little bit of that is in Tesla, or electrical 4x4 cars like Rivian in the US. But then when you look at China, it's already outpacing everything that's happening in the US with companies like Baidu, who are completely advancing the whole technology of batteries, and companies like BYD, XPeng, and creating cars that can go 500 miles or plus on one charge. So it's those companies that are now driving innovation, and the US is basically just barely keeping up. And certain recent surveys about the Chinese market shows that the market itself has preference for autonomous driving. 60% of the respondents basically said, we want autonomous driving, and of course we want electric vehicles and so on. And that is by itself creating a huge opportunity for those companies. Again, you're going into a market of 1 billion plus population, and offering them something like smart cars or electric vehicles. So this is again a place where this picture on the left side is a autonomous delivery of packages, also in China. So what you're seeing is basically the market is quickly moving. It's moving at a much faster pace than anybody is expecting. And again, you soon will see those same technologies being then exported. So the advantage China has is a big market to start with, and then exporting. And then last example I give I'll give you about is how China dealt with COVID-19. It was the companies like Alibaba with their cloud, and Tencent and Baidu, who contributed to the whole contact tracing and the whole health code coloring that they came up with, supported by Wechat. So you see in the picture here how people basically just show their health code color before they're allowed entrance into a city, and the whole autonomous delivery and robotic delivery of food into hotels and so on was all driven by those companies. And of course, what do they do next? They export that. Also, when you look at a lot of the low-tech products, China was amazing in how quickly they were able to turn around. If you remember a few months ago when this whole thing broke out and people had difficulty buying masks, I got offers from companies in China who used to, for example, produce electric bikes and skates, and suddenly they're offering us masks. So they were able to turn very quickly onto what the market needs, and that's definitely a strength that China has, and others should probably learn from them. And then when you're looking at the next big thing, which is quantum computing, you see here, Sundar, the CEO of Google, next to his quantum machine and the processor that they created. Quantum computing is something very interesting in the space of technology. But quickly the Chinese are picking up. They're challenging Google's Sycamore. They have come up with, they already launched a quantum satellite, basically satellite that uses quantum technology to encrypt the data that gets sent, which means nobody can ever spy onto it, because the minute you look at it, it changes. And they're basically doing the same thing for even making drones, using quantum physics for making drones that you can't hack into. So that's again how China picks up something. Maybe they're not the first ones to make it, but they're really the ones to scale. And speaking of drones, a few years ago when drones started coming up, Intel had a huge initiative on drones, and they started doing this. I don't know if you've seen those. Well, you've seen it here in Singapore, probably at New Year's celebration or last NDP. You had drones flying and doing an image or a picture. Intel is the one that started that, and they started that with 50 drones, and they were so excited about it. But you look at a lot of the recent drone events like these in China, and it's literally thousands of drones flying into formation and creating some very entertaining and interesting images in the sky. Again, they picked it up and they got better at it. So I hope that gave you a feel about how, China as a country picked up a lot of those technologies and then got better at them. But it's not just China. As I gave you the example with TSMC, it's Taiwan. And Singapore has been a basis for high-tech production and, a couple of decades ago until now. And you look at companies like Micron and others who are still here in Singapore. But I think what we need to look at is we need to look at those Chinese companies and see how we can learn from them and get as good as they are. We might not have the scale, but we do definitely have the education. We have a lot of the know-how. So I think one observation I have from looking at all of those is that, few Chinese companies are good from going from 0 to 1, like, innovation from nothing, although now they're starting to get there. Majority of them are excellent at scaling 1 to N, so basically going into mass production. And there's some factors driving that. They do have the wolf-like entrepreneurial and commercial culture driving aggressive sales. So as soon as they have a product, they're pursuing the partners and the markets that all the markets they can get it to with very aggressive products and pricing. Driving the pricing down is probably one of their strengths. So if you look at, for example, the tablet business and how they were able to drive the prices of tablets and then phones down into something that makes it affordable for everybody. Of course, as I mentioned, it's a bigger market, so it's easier for them to get a larger customer base. And then there's abundant investment there from venture capitalists and private equity, but also state-owned and government initiated investment in startups. And we have that here in Singapore as well. There's a lot of VCs here. The government does a lot of investing. If you have an idea that you want to initiate and develop, the government is very supportive, which is a good start to be with. They also have very intense competition, and that drives amongst them a sense of urgency in wanting to be first. And then you have a consumer base who is very hungry for the latest and willing to try new technologies. And there's also kind of a national drive for push to outpace the US and the West and get better than them. And it's almost like a cult mentality among startups that they want to be the next Apple or the next Amazon, and the whole garage mentality and driving. There's a big hunger for that, and of course, a lot of that is also driven by wanting to be a millionaire and billionaire, unicorn. So that basically all of those drive those aspects in China. But if I look for us here, I think we have a lot of those same options. Maybe not as much the market size, but if I look at ASEAN, we even have a bigger opportunity here, because if you look at the rest of ASEAN, it's still developing, and you look at just next door, Indonesia, 250 million people, slowly getting into middle class, and basically it's going to be a reflection of exactly what's happening in China. And we have the opportunity that we can be the ones that create the 0 to 1 and then do some of the scaling and then pass it on to others. But we definitely have that opportunity. So my advice to those of you considering getting into this space, I'll start with what Steve Jobs said in one of his speeches, is stay hungry and stay foolish. Basically, look for opportunities everywhere. And like I said, opportunities are there wherever there's pain points, or where there's a way where you can think you can take something and make it better. And when you're working, the other thing I would say is, let's stay foolish in terms of go ahead and take risks and try different things. Now, as you engage, I would say we also have the advantage here of the language, where we can interact directly with countries like China, and we can create technologies and then have them help us scale it and reach to the rest of the world. And even them, as China as a market is a huge market. So engage with them, engage aggressively, but stay paranoid. Again, Intel's ex-CEO and chairman, God bless him, Andy Grove, he always used to tell us, only the paranoid survive. And actually he wrote a book on that. I encourage you to look into that. It's called Only the Paranoid Survive. And you always need to be paranoid and don't just kind of let all your guards down, regardless. This is not just with China, but anybody you work with. And also when it comes, especially when it comes into new technologies, there's a lot of, I would call it vaporware and foilware. So don't believe everything that people tell you they have. Don't be discouraged if they say, oh, we already have it. A lot of times they don't have it. And even when they show you that they have it, verify, double verify, see how it's done, learn how they make it, go and see how they make it. And then be prepared to move fast. But I always say, when you do that, stay true to your values. A lot of people, as they try to move fast and get competitive, they might get into, I would say, gray zones that you want to definitely avoid, because that's never the right way to grow. And then always have something in your back pocket, which means you can't just have one idea and stay with it for life. You always have to continuously develop and evolve. Stay paranoid, always assume that somebody is going to come up with something that you already have, or maybe, God forbid, take what you have and then make it better. Maybe copy it. That happens all the time. That's why you need to always have something else that you come up with and you pull it out there. But immerse yourself, embrace it, embrace those new technologies, adopt them, share, communicate with them. But also know when you say, okay, you know what, this is not my zone anymore, I'm gonna pull out. A lot of entrepreneurs are so in love with their ideas, they continue going with it beyond the stage where it's making them money and they start losing. I've seen that time and time again. So I would leave you with that just know also when to retreat and say, okay, I'm gonna move something else, and just become a serial entrepreneur. So that is my few words. I hope I inspired you with seeing how things evolved and how they moved. And they moved from the US to China, and they can move from China to Singapore and ASEAN. And it is people like you at the end who will drive that change and that progression. And I look forward to seeing some of the innovation that comes here from our own backyard. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam, for your insightful sharing. Meanwhile, among the audience, if you have any questions and wish to clarify them with our wonderful speakers, please feel free to post them in the Q&A tab in the Zoom meeting. If you see interesting questions posted by other participants, you can also give them an upvote. We will try to answer as many of your questions in the later panel discussion session. So next up, we'll have Terry, who is a venture partner of Alpha JWC Ventures. Terry is a fintech expert with deep fintech experience in both China and the US. Over to you, Terry.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if I can do that. Hold on. All right, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you. So I'm gonna start. Thank you for having me. Bit about myself. I'm a venture partner at Alpha JWC. I mostly invest in fintech. I have industry experience in China and a little bit in the US as well. The difference is I have a background in financial institutions, not from tech. So I kind of look at this whole industry from a more conventional financial institution angle. Fintech, unlike other tech industries, they have to deal with a lot of legacy issues because a lot of finance is based on institutions and regulation, not just technology and innovation. Okay, so let's start. Just a bit of definition because fintech is a very confusing word. So it's best understood as 3 layers of technology transforming the financial system. The first layer is what everyone sees, is the UX, basically the app, a lot of that actually has to do with design. So WeChat Pay, Alipay, all this Apple Pay, all the stuff that you see on the phones, basically UX. The second layer, when you go a little bit deeper, is called alternative finance. It's actually how most fintech companies make money. And most of it has to do with some sort of digital lending. So they either do that from some balance sheets or based on a crowdfunding model. So P2P, basically. There was a little bit of robo-advisor at the time, but now that subvertical is mostly quite silent. Now the third layer, which is the most misunderstood part, but arguably the most important, is actually financial infrastructure. It has to do with payments and settlement systems, how money actually moves, first across people and across institutions, and then across countries. A lot of this stuff that you hear about blockchain actually pertains to this third layer, which is an infrastructure layer. And there are companies who do that, but a lot of this is actually driven by policy. Now, the Chinese fintech model has evolved into a complete self-contained ecosystem of its own with all these three layers. I would not spend a lot of time on this diagram, but what the point is, it moved from a web-based era into a mobile internet-based era, and fintech in China mostly started in the mobile internet era, but it kind of reaped a lot of benefits from the web-based era. Especially a lot of these e-commerce guys who which gave China a massive ecosystem to apply to fintech. Okay, the first lesson from China for Southeast Asia in this sector called fintech is the integration of the three layers we talked about. Now, why is the fintech model so good? Why do people say, oh my God, China leads the way in fintech? And it is because they integrated three layers. A lot of the infrastructure was done rightly by the government. For example, how payment licenses were designed and how they encouraged banks to connect to payment companies, how they pushed an upgrade of certain systems, things like that. If you look at the US, which actually on the whole has much more advanced technology, they haven't done it. Because the really core underlying infrastructure in fintech is quite old. A lot of it is still basically 1990s technology. So for example, you have PayPal, and say you have even Apple Pay, and you connect to Lending Club and Prosper and all these fabulous companies. But the underlying code that moves your money on top of all this stuff, it's still basically Visa and MasterCard technology. And if you're doing bank transfer, it's even older. It's called ACH system. And that creates a lot of bottlenecks and hindrance moving forward. And China pretty much solved that. Now, that for Southeast Asia is a massive opportunity because unlike China, the younger generation in Southeast Asia pretty much skipped the web-based era. A lot of the generation, I think called Generation C now, they are internet natives on a mobile phone. So they're very much familiar with social media, with how you buy on mobile apps and things like that. And you do have a lot of very successful startups in Southeast Asia, like Gojek, Grab, Traveloka, that serve those customers. But the financial infrastructure layer is massively lacking if you look at ASEAN in general. In Singapore, it's pretty good, but if you look at ASEAN in general, not that great. And this gap is a very big opportunity. As Sam said, wherever there's a pain point, there's opportunity, and that is a massive, massive pain point. The second lesson, I don't need to spend too much time on this, is do not confuse fin from tech. You cannot run an unlicensed financial business under the guise of innovation. Or you cannot run a lending company pretending it, to be a tech company. It just does not work that way. So China had that from 2013, 2016. There was a massive boom in P2P because the economy needed a lot of alternative financing. And it turns out a lot of these companies were essentially running unlicensed financial businesses, and the regulator eventually shut them down. And a lot of these guys kind of went out of business. Certain people, equity investors included, lost quite a bit of money. So this is something to really think about when you are starting a fintech business. If you are fundamentally providing alternative financing, and there is nothing wrong with that, you have to get a license and you have to observe regulation. That's actually very important. All right, that's a huge lesson. And I think the good thing as far as Southeast Asia is concerned is that the regulators actually learned that lesson from China. Now, having said that, we have to talk a little bit about the relationship between the fin and the tech. When this fintech boom started, I think in the US and in a little bit in the UK, there was a lot of talk about unbundling a bank. So there was this idea that banks are old, they're dinosaurs, and they can't build really good products. We have to break them apart, essentially unbundle a bank. So we just, instead of looking a bank as a bank, we look at a product like lending. So we just do lending or payments or insurance. And then over time, it turns out, well, there's a reason that financial activities are bundled together, because you need funding and you need to move money around. I mean, they're all quite related. The problem with banks is not that they're bundled together. There are two really, really big issues. Number one, the operations are usually very inefficient because they are supported by very, very old legacy technology. That's number one. And number two, that technology came from an era which cannot really give you data analytics. And therefore, it's hard to have any insights into the customers and into the types of risks they're taking. By rebundling that, essentially combining the fin and tech, you're really solving the problem, but it's not an easy problem to solve. Yeah. So the next slide shows how one might solve this using the example of our portfolio. The key is how you build an ecosystem that solves the flow of data. So you have consumers and you have merchants, and as they create transactions, the data is also automatically created. And do you have technology that can share the data and that can look into that data and learn from it? And can you have financial institutions that can observe financial logic and also build systems that can take advantage of that? I think that actually it's quite important for Southeast Asia building fintech going forward. China does this pretty well, and as we can see in the next section, but mostly for 2C. So this is the third lesson. China pretty much solved the entire fintech problem for 2C, essentially the consumer business. You want to buy stuff in e-commerce, there's like online payments, there's mobile payments, even for offline services, like you want to get a coffee, you can pay with Wechat Pay, Alipay, whatever. And if you need a loan, you don't need a credit card anymore. You can just go to WeChat and you can apply for a loan on WeChat. And it's literally not a credit card, it's just a virtual credit line. All right, so that's a 2C business, and pretty much China has solved that. Because it took advantage of what I said before, essentially sharing data analytics and learning from it, and solving a lot of inefficiencies in operations for financial institutions. Now, what it has not done is solving this for 2B. So in the 2B space, when you're serving merchants and corporates, China has still a long way to go. All the way from UX to financial infrastructure. Merchants such as, even merchants such as those selling on Taobao or on Alibaba, for them to get supply chain financing seamlessly, it is still not quite done. Yeah, and not to mention anything that's cross-border. Now, why do I say this? This is actually far more important for Southeast Asia. If you look at the entire region, the ASEAN region, obviously you have a younger but poorer population. A lot of people in ASEAN, they need production loans. They need essentially production capital. So we're talking about Warung owners in Indonesia. We're talking about people who sell things in Bangkok, in the market, in street markets in Bangkok, and their equivalents who do that online. And now, with the rise of social commerce, you have a fair number of these people selling these goods on social media. They need kind of merchant services and fintech support for those services. So that again is a massive, massive opportunity for ASEAN. And of course, ASEAN is not one nation, unlike China. You have a natural cross-border kind of issue to solve, and that's where Singapore is very well positioned to do some of that because of the currency, essentially. Now, we talked a little bit about China, the 3 lessons. Now we're really looking in an area that China may not be very good at, and this is where Southeast Asia may even surpass China, and that's digital banking. So, fintech, if you look back towards the history in China, the first P2P company started in 2007, and that's Pai. 10 years, more than 10 years have passed. The boom was really around 2015 and 16, and it ended in 16. So what we have is essentially a lot of fintech solutions for 2C in China, and they kind of have this 2B issue, like I mentioned. And to really solve that, you kind of need to be a bank, a digital bank. So there is a growing confidence that VCs are the new superheroes and they can just build whatever they want. And that's really not true, because there are certain things that only banks can do. Now, I don't need to read every single bullet point on the slide. The main point is, if you want to hold money overnight legally, pretty much you need to be a bank. If you want to create credit through the central bank, how everybody talks about central bank printing money, you want to be able to be part of that credit creation, you need to be a bank. You cannot be a P2P company or just some digital lender and connect to central bank funding. That's not how it works. And for VCs, it's pretty critical that we do not invest in fintech companies that are on a complete collision course with banks, because banks are indeed kind of special for the reasons I mentioned above. Now, therefore, it's no surprise that Asian governments are pushing for this effort. And as you know, Singapore will probably release the successful applicants for its digital banking licenses I think in September. It was a little bit delayed because of the COVID situation. In 2013 or 14, when this kind of got traction in Asia, basically governments and financial institutions were all blindsided. Like they don't know what to think. And then once they figure out what this is, it's just like, oh, we just need to make a digital banking license. And lo and behold, here we are. And that's kind of the next big thing for fintech. And that's something that China may stumble. Now, this is a complicated slide, and I actually want to spend some time on it because this is where Singapore can actually, or ASEAN in general, can really leapfrog. If you think about digital banking, there are broadly three categories. Like, first of all, you need to have very strong technology and data infrastructure. You can't run a digital bank if your technology sucks. It's very obvious, all right? Then there's the license landscape, and that's closely related to how incumbents think about this. All right, you can't run a digital bank if all the incumbents are against it and there's no real license for it. And that's a little bit of the case in the US. In the UK, it's actually the opposite. UK is very supportive of challenger banks and digital banks. The third is connectivity to global markets and market size. Banking, by definition, especially in this part of the world, is a global business. You can't just run a whole digital bank in just one small country, or even in any country in ASEAN. It doesn't really work that way. You need to be able to connect to the world and move capital and funding around. Okay, so having said that, let's compare ASEAN and China. Digital loan systems, yes, China, pretty good. Probably a bit better than ASEAN, but ASEAN not far behind. There are fintech startups who do that. Fully integrated digital wallets, that's your Alipay and Wechat Pay and all that. Yeah, China's more advanced. I mean, I think Grab and Gojek are probably leading the way in that in ASEAN, but they can still have some ways to go. China has very strong national data infrastructure. You want to KYC someone, you want to look up someone's ID, match the name to the ID. China has all that down. Not so in ASEAN, and that's where it's behind. Then there's the actual core banking infrastructure. Neither China nor ASEAN have that. All right, so again, alluding back to the point that Sam made earlier, don't believe it when someone says they have everything. No, there's technology that even China is kind of not really having, and they actually have trouble getting their own digital core banking system. Then in incumbents, now it's actually very difficult to get any kind of banking license in China. There's no clear path to it. There are only 3 existing digital banks: Ant Financial, WeBank, which is Wechat, and Xinwang Bank, which is a Xiaomi kind of joint venture. And you do have strong state-owned banks digitizing to kind of, stop the rise of challenger banks. ASEAN, probably first in Singapore and in Malaysia, you have a very clear path to make a digital bank. And I think that's actually quite encouraging. The incumbents are slow and aging. And I think there's a lot of room for something like that to emerge. The third is where Singapore has a killer advantage. There are many geopolitical headwinds right now for China to do to do anything of that nature. Imagine China just makes a digital bank and wants to connect to all the global market systems. There's a lot of resistance to it. And then the renminbi itself is not freely exchangeable. So, it's, how do they anchor their currency if they make that kind of a bank? You can't do that in Singapore. There is availability of major anchor currencies. Obviously, the Singaporean dollar, the US dollar, euro, JPY, they're all freely tradable. And you don't have capital controls in Singapore. And of course, there are no geopolitical headwinds for Singapore to do something like this. So anyways, that wraps up my talk. I think there are lessons the region can learn from China as far as fintech goes, but kind of in the next phase of digital banking, I think ASEAN, especially led by Singapore, can actually leapfrog China, and I do really look forward to that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry, for your enlightening insights. We have seen now quite a few excellent questions posted in the Q&A tab, and don't hesitate to voice out if you haven't done so. It would be a great opportunity to have our experienced speakers help clarify your doubts and fulfill your curiosity. Last but not least, we have our third speaker for today, who is Mr. Amit, Executive Director at Middle Office Technology and Transformation at DBS Asia Hub 2. Over to you, Mr. Amit.
Hello, thank you for having me, and good evening to all of you as well. What I wanted to do today was talk out not necessarily something which is constrained to boundaries, right? When I say boundaries, to nation boundaries, state boundaries, I wanted to talk about more about what is happening at a global scale at this point in time, right? Which is technology and the convergence of technology, right? And then I also wanted to take from there and talk about what are some of the opportunities that this technology convergence is presenting to us at a global scale. And what are some of the key success factors or challenges that we need to surpass to ensure that we stay on top of this technology convergence that is happening all around us at this point in time. So I would really appreciate you giving me some of your attention over the next few minutes, as they say. Just bear with me. I'm going to share my screen now and then start over. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we can see.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, what really is digital technology convergence? So before I get into that, let's just talk about that as well, right? So this is a combination of various technology factors, right? And various technology stacks, whether it is AI, ML, Internet of Things, data ledger. I have a few of them noted down next, right? So let's just talk through that. So you see what is happening at this point in time, right? And this is a fact. I have been in technology myself for the last 25 to 30 years at this point in time, right? I started my journey here in India, and I went across to Europe, to US, parts of South America, and I'm back now, right? But the fact is, never have I been this excited about technology and the prospects that it has of changing the world around us, right? And the reason for that, right? The reason for that is the positive mindset and focus that we as technologists have towards introducing change, not only in one dimension, but in multiple dimensions, right? And that is why, as you can see, we've got multiple technology factors and technology stacks and areas all coming to play at the same point in time. So firstly, we have artificial intelligence, machine learning, right? Which is around how can systems respond in an intelligent way by learning, right? Based on data that they are reading. Right? Then we have data management, which is around managing the large amounts of data, right? And connecting ecosystems based on data. Internet of Things is around building a connectivity again right, of various devices, whether it is mobile devices, medical devices, industrial devices, domestic appliances, social elements in terms of which you can find in your environment. This could be your street light. It could be anything, right? So connecting things together, right, is another key technology factor or driver. Augmented reality, virtual reality, I think we all know about this as well, right? Google Glass was a not so positive example of it, but it was certainly in the realm. We have nanotechnology, the ability of technology at a microscopic level or a nano level in this case to come together to do different functions. If you take cloud, the ability to take and connect different elements in a network, right, outside the realm of a specific organization, right, into the public organization or probably private as well, depending on the nature of the cloud, right? 5G technology, which is around, again, taking the entire networking element to a totally different level with much higher, bandwidth and so on and so forth. Robotics, the ability to, again, automate things. And again, the list goes on and on, right? There's a few ones I've not talked about. I've not talked about cryptography here. I've not talked about, food-related changes that are going on. It's really, really a plethora and a prolific landscape that we have today, right? But for the purposes of this conversation, I'm just going to focus on 3 of them, right? Which is artificial intelligence, DLP technology, and as part of data management, and then Internet of Things, right? And we'll take various examples of how these can come together and some use cases and what are the opportunities there. Okay, so that's it. Let's focus on each of those, right? Before we get into some of the use cases, we want to basically make sure that the landscape is clear. You all understand what I'm talking about here, right? So just to lay the land, as they say. So artificial intelligence, machine learning, right, is nothing but the ability of systems to learn on their own and then take intelligent decisions based on that, right? This is no different from human learning, except that it is displayed and exhibited by machines, right? And the key factors that you can see to that is stimulus, right, which then leads to communication. And through communication challenge, it then leads to interpretation of what really is the stimulus. On top of it, you can also have reasoning applied to say, what does this really mean? And then from that reasoning, you will derive learning, right? And then when that learning is actually done over and over again and retained, it becomes knowledge. And then if you put structure around it to say, this is how you react, this is how you plan, and this is how you organize yourself based on the knowledge and the learning that you have, then we react in a certain way. And this entire chain of doing things together in an automated manner without human intervention is what machine learning and artificial intelligence is about. That's a foundation stone of it, right? So that's the artificial intelligence machine learning part of it, guys. Next one, Internet of Things. Again, as I said earlier, right? An ecosystem of interconnected devices, physical objects, right? What are we talking about here? Home network, right? With Google, with Alexa, with Amazon, right? There are various devices which are there. Apple devices, I know Siemens and various other manufacturing appliances, companies are getting their devices together. Is an example of a home IoT, right? Urban IoT is around citywide lighting, so it goes beyond home to our external environment. If we take that to the next level, we're talking about IR 4.0, which is Industrial Revolution 4.0 potentially coming in with machines, right? Then interacting with themselves without human intervention, potentially, right? So that's the IoT is enabling that as well. If you take it into the healthcare sector, right, then you're talking about IoT devices where you could have, right, a nanotechnology based device embedded in somebody's veins, somebody's oral canal, right, to go and then perform operations intrinsically within their body, right? And those devices could then interact and be controlled externally from external to the human being as well, the person in this case, again enabling healthcare related IoT ecosystems, right? Of course, we all know about cars being intelligent where they can interact with each other. I know some movies have certainly shown this. Some movies from Hollywood have certainly shown this, right? We can put those devices in vehicles, ships, cars, bicycles, you name it, right? That basically leads to the Internet of Moving Things. So IoT is certainly the connectivity of various devices together, right? By combining network, compute, and storage to a small extent, right? That's pretty much what it is at a very basic level. If you take that then, right, into what are the subsystems of a IoT system, as I said earlier, right? You got network, you got devices, right? Which basically is the underlying infrastructure for an IoT system. And then you got a platform, which is basically the rules engine, which decides and determines what really needs to be done with the devices that are there in specific use cases. There's also a data management solution, which then needs to make sure that we have the data corresponding to the entire ecosystem managed and saved. And then we can take the entire logic behind this to build applications on top of it as well, which is where the application side comes in, right? And then you can also do reporting and so on and so forth with that. And there's interaction between all these different layers. That's a very simplistic level, a breakdown of an IoT system, right? Or an application. Let's go to the last part then, distributed ledger technology, right? So again, this represents a combination of various technologies coming together from a data perspective, where you've got geographically spread, right? Decentralized, consensus driven. It's not just one person who's saying the data needs to be there, right? Or this is the data. It's multiple people agreeing on the data itself, right? It is unalterable by design because everybody has potentially a copy of it, if it's a public one, right? And then that ensures that it's not going to be altered, because changing it would mean that changing everything. It's replicated over a peer-to-peer network. It's secure because it's driven by high standards of cryptography. And by doing this, what it enables is it enables different stakeholders within an ecosystem, whether it is within a nation, whether it is across multiple nations, whether it across an organization or multiple organizations, to then say, yes, I agree and I believe in this data because I trust in the system that is there. And that is why if somebody comes to me and tells me that this contract has been signed by person A and originated at person A, because that person built it, and I trust it because this ledger, this record keeping system has maintained those records in a secure way and is not going to change. They are not alterable. And there are different types of it, right? Public, private, I won't go into details of that, but there are different types of it. It can be public, where it's open to pretty much everybody. Private, where only a few people get it. Federated would be, again, a consortium, where a federation of people have permission to it. Permissioned, again, is where everybody has permission or nobody has permission. Those are the different types there as well, right? So DLT is what that is. Blockchain, for example, is an implementation or an example of a DLT technology, right? So that's that. Now let's go and talk about the opportunities that we have, right? So let's take a very simple and basic case of a payment system. Okay, a system where a payment is initiated and it's completed, right? And within that payment system, let's focus on the fraud detection part of it, right? So in this case, as you can see, there are certain technology enablers which we will need, right? So we'll need big data technology to ensure that the data is stored and is processed and can be computed in a very fast way. The computing can be done on a cloud-based environment. The machine learning ensemble will be responsible for ensuring that there is intelligence derived, right? Which is basically all these elements put together is what this machine learning enables in this case. And then let's see how the system is going to work. So imagine, right, that somebody has initiated a payment transaction, a client has initiated a payment transaction. It comes to the system over here, right? What this system does, what this fraud detection system does, is that it has intelligence built over a period of time, right? This could be records going back to 10 years, 15 years, whatever is the amount of duration, that period that people say this comes to, right? And based on that, the system is then able to say the transaction that has come to me is a fraudulent transaction or not, because it has got the history behind it, and it is intelligent enough to make a decision to say, yes, if a transaction originated at 3 a.m. in the morning for a person who was always located and based out of, in this case, say, let's say China, right? But in this case, exceptional case, this person has gone to, say, some part of remote part of South America, right? Where this person is not expected to go because nobody has told me about it, right? As a banking system or a financial payment system. So, and that is why the system can then flag this as being a fraudulent transaction, which will then be reflected in the fraud alert response that you see over here, right? So again, this is an example of a payment system use case where we got different technology sets, right? So we got cloud technology, we got big data technology, we got AI and ML technology, right? On the client side, this can be various combinations as well. It can be AR, VR based technology, right? It can be an IoT or IoMT, mobile based technology, where you can just have this transaction being triggered from your mobile phone potentially, right? From an AR, VR perspective, it could be the intelligent glass that you're wearing that is going to trigger this transaction. So again, there are different technologies coming together, right? Let's take another use case. We talk about the DLT, blockchain-based trade supply chain, right? So again, in a supply chain, if you talk about, right, a trade supply chain, there are different parts to it, right? There are people who are responsible at the source level, right, for the generation of the asset or initiation of the supply chain of the asset, right? Then there is the dispatching of it, right? There's the payment of it, right? There is a contractual element around it as well, right? There's a tracking of it, and there are various parts of it as well. So in a scenario like this, right, an architecture like this can work. So you've got different implementation components. You can see them over here, which is this layer. And then from an architecture perspective, a technology perspective, you can talk about a base technology architecture, right, where you've got the cloud, and in the cloud, you can have different forms of compute, data, and network also available, right? Then you build the platform on top of it, which again, we can do using blockchain, because blockchain can mean that you have all the different parties in the entire supply chain, right from the producer to the distributor to the consumer, connected, interconnected, right? So let me just give you an example of how this could be implemented, right? So imagine that I am into the oil refining, right, and distribution business. So I am somebody who starts off, the supply chain in this case starts off from the crude oil production, right? So I have the crude oil production. I then start dispatching it. When I'm dispatching it, this is where the dispatching and the shipment service comes into place, right? I have an IoT device which is embedded in the vehicle, which is responsible for shipping and transporting my entire package. In this case, it happens to be crude oil, right? So that's where IoT comes in from a client perspective, right? It goes on to the next level where, assuming that everything is okay, it goes off to somebody to pay. The consumer gets it, right? Or the distributor gets it. And they say, okay, I'm satisfied with the quality of your service. And then it initiates a payment service. The same payment service that we talked about, where we had AI and the ensemble model, can be used in this case as well. And what happens at each of these steps is when we get the tracking part, when we get the payment part, all of those details are then tracked and fed into this blockchain platform that we have here, right? And it is done in an intelligent manner because we are using AI and ML behind it, right? And underlying all of that, of course, as things go, you've got the corresponding data parts of it, which is where the technology layer comes here for storage of the data. So again, as you can see in this case, right, we have taken different technologies. We have taken blockchain, we have taken AI, ML, right? We have taken, for other implementations as well, microservices. We have taken IoT, right? We have taken cloud, and we are connecting it together, right? So something, and to be honest, I had the privilege of implementing a solution like this in my last role, right, in Citigroup, and I can tell you this for sure, for a fact, we were able to transform the supply chain of a key asset, where initially our lead time for the end-to-end processing, right, of a transaction. When I say transaction, I'm talking right from the production to the distribution to the consumption, right? If it was, say, let's say 10 days in this case, right, we had a reduction of 43%. 43%, guys, is not a small number in a traditional supply chain. So again, right, technology convergence has the opportunity to make huge impacts. And this is just an example of how we can get all of these different technologies coming together as different parts of a jigsaw and making change happen and transforming digitally to a very, very significant level, right? That's another example of that. Let's take another example, right? So let's take IoT, again, which we took earlier on, and talk about different sectors, right? More from a retail perspective, maybe. Let's talk retail sector over here. I mean, there are different ones, but it's mainly the consumer side over here, right? We've got the payments side over here, the financial services, right? And we've got the applications, the service providers that over here, right? So, for example, I'm a gas service provider, or we can even take the example of retail. So let's take, for example, I am somebody who is a retail chain owner, right? Let's see, that's probably a good example. So let's a retail chain owner, right? I have a fridge over here, right? The fridge is connected to my home network. My home network is then connected to the external network. The external network is then connected to the banking network or the payment network. The payment network is then connected to the retail supplier app, right? To the service provider network, right? And which is again finally connected to the consumers. So in this case, let's assume that I have run out of milk. Let's take a very simple example. I run out of milk. What happens then? My fridge, which has got an IoT device in it, right, senses that, oh, I've run out of milk. It then automatically, using AI, identifies that what I need to do is signal, right, to my retail supplier to provide me that milk, get milk back, right? But I have to pay for it. So it goes through the entire payment engine where you've got the payment processor, you've got the digital wallet from where the money comes out, right? It can be fiat currencies or cryptocurrencies, right? It's paid, goes back to the shop. From there, the retail suppliers knows, oh, okay, this person X has run out of milk. In 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever the number of periods or time of fixed duration is, I get milk back in my home. Right? That's just an example of how something like this, the entire ecosystem can be changed by the convergence of technologies. So in this case, again, IoT, right? Cryptocurrency or crypto technology, payment processor, again, this is more traditional technology, but you got blockchain, which is going to keep a record of all of this, right? And various other factors as well. So the point again I'm trying to make here is no other time in history have we had so many different pieces of technology coming together to make change happen, right? So the opportunity is certainly immense. It certainly is very immense, right? As you can see here, right? The instant timely payment, right, is the example I said there. But if you look at the target market, right, they're saying that by the end of this year, right, the IoT market will be around $0.5 billion, right, with close to 3 trillion transactions coming out. So this research is slightly dated, but that's the number they talked about. This is probably a couple of years back, right? That's the number they talked about. So by no means is $0.5 billion market a small market. Right? So again, a huge opportunity for technology convergence and transforming various sectors. But then the question is, are all of these examples and use cases and opportunities going to succeed? What will it take? What is needed? What are the challenges to make all of this successful, right? And the answer lies in key things, in my view, right? Technology is good. You can have the best technology, right? The best security, the best data management practices, the best quality, robustness, interoperability, usability, everything, all the nice things that you see there. But if it is not aligned with the business factors, right, around legal and compliance frameworks, corporate governance frameworks, data frameworks, social and ethical impacts, right, then it's not going to work. If it's not in line with what your consumers expect, it's not going to work. So as technologists, as people looking to make change happen, as people who are looking to provide solutions in the industry, right, as business leaders, it is very imperative for us as client-facing leaders, right, and consumers as well. It's very imperative for us to align these 3 elements for technology convergence and digital transformation, for that matter, to happen successfully. Right. Let me give you an example. In my own case, right, the example I gave earlier on fraud detection, right, we had a clear case where, with that engine that I talked about, right, the payments engine and the fraud and the detection, anomaly detection solution I talked about, I was able to reduce the transaction processing time for a transaction, a financial payment transaction, before it hit the payment processor, from being around 8 to 10 hours to less than 100 milliseconds. So transaction which would have been processed at the end of day was now being processed in real time, thanks to technology convergence, which then enabled me to offer that to my clients to say, you can do real-time transactions now, my friend, right? My big corporate healthcare client, my big corporate consumer client, FMCG client, you can do real-time transactions now because I'm enabling this for you. But they came to me and said, Amit, that's great, but sorry, by the way, my clients are not ready for it. Because they will ask me a question, an ethical question, potentially, right? The question might be, remember the same example I gave, that example I gave about somebody being in South America, who was generally based in China, but they've gone to South America, and the payment transaction blocking it, or the system, the AI system blocking it, right? That could be a genuine case. It could be a case where somebody has a relative in South America, so they've traveled from China to South America for that processing to happen, and they were trying to do a transaction over there. Maybe it's somebody who's ill at 3 a.m. in the morning, and they're trying to go and in an emergency section, an ICU section of a hospital, right? To make sure that they are taking care of a near and dear one. If my AI engine blocks them and prevents them from making the transaction, and God forbid, but they have a negative impact where somebody has passed away because of that, because they were in an emergency in the ICU, then that consumer can come and sue me as somebody who's introduced an AI solution which has unethically and wrongly blocked them. This is a real case, guys. This happened. This question came to me. And my note to them was that, guys, I'm going to give you 2 options around it, right? One is, let's make sure that we have got a nice and correct and strong legal and compliance framework in place between you, the FMCG goods provider, and your end clients, where they sign a document with you, an agreement with you to say, this is what I'm going to introduce from an AI perspective. There's a short period of time where it will be in pilot mode. If something goes wrong, I'm not liable for it. So that's the legal and compliance framework I'm talking about, right? Because if you don't have that in place, somebody can sue you, and you will, for billions of dollars if you're a big corporation, and you're going to be in a lot of trouble, right? So again, that certainly is needed. But more importantly, right, I gave him a second option as well. I told them that what else you can do is you can introduce a human element in there for maybe 6 months, right? For an 8-month period, where we will get and do reinforced learning of your AI model. What that basically means is that before we block the transaction, a human person will come in between and will have to say yes or no after looking at the facts, which we assume is going to remove some bias which potentially could be built in your AI model, right? So that again, guys, is the note I'm trying to make, right? Technology is great. Technology convergence is great. All these opportunities are great of revolutionizing the world. But if you don't take care of some of these basic elements, we are calling for disaster as corporations and firms, right? And again, my request to all of you, right, as the future of tomorrow, right? When I look at yourselves and think over yourselves, I see you as being the future, right? I'm an old person with gray hair and not just on the top, on facial hair as well. But you are the future, right? I would request you to always bear these 3 things in mind, right? That technology is great, but align it with business needs and align it with what your customers need and how they're going to interact with the technology and with. Only then will technology convergence be successful, guys. With that, I wanted to thank you for your time and for listening to me. And I'm more than happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Sure, thank you, Amit. So for the next 20 minutes, we will have the panel discussion for this session. And I would like to invite Sam and Terry to join in the panel, and our moderator for this session will be Chijia and myself. And without further ado, let's dive right into answer your questions. So I can see there are a few excellent questions, interesting questions posed. One of which would be, there is this concern about the current technology war ongoing between China and the US. And what do you guys think about this? And what do you see what do you foresee on this issue in the future? And I know Terry has sort of given an answer to this question. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on this.
I'm sorry, guys. I just have a hard stop in 5 minutes, but also I'm okay to take some few questions, but I might not have the entire time. So apologies for that, Andrea. Sure.
So since you're leaving, can you take the question first?
Sure. Thanks for the redirection. Terry, apologies for interjecting there as well.
No problem. No problem.
So my view on this is this, right, guys? The history of the world has shown us this, right? That competition is a good thing, right? Because when there are superpowers or powers or conflicting forces coming together, what happens at the end of the day is most likely the best outcome for the consumers and the overall global scenario. Because if that hadn't happened, right, then we could have been probably in the dark ages where you would still be riding horses, right? Let me give you some more insight into what I'm trying to say there, right? So ages ago, right, I did see ages ago I did see a movie, a black and white movie, in fact, at this point in time, right, where the entire premise of that movie, right, was between somebody who was trying to portray that horse carriages is a good thing, and if when horse carriages come over the world, horse carriages when they come over, it's good, but then you will get automobiles coming over, right? And automobiles will take away everything from the horse carriages, and they're going to run out of business, and they're going to survive, right? So in the end, in that movie, they did show that horse carriage guy won over the automobile guy. But we all know what the reality is, which is the automobiles are there now. They have that's past horse carriages, right? So the point I want to make is this, right? Whether we like it or not, nature in itself is a great example of survival of the fittest and survival of the best. So to me, right, competition is a great thing. It's a good thing. It might lead to an interim period of strife. Yes, there might be some interim difficulties, but in the end, what comes out is generally going to be a good thing. And so that's my view on it, personally.
Sure, thank you. Maybe Terry, you want to further elaborate on your previous answers?
Is this a general, is this a general question on the tech war, or is this in particular in the context of fintech? Because I answered a little bit on fintech. I guess I can take that up first. So in terms of fintech, I think a lot of fundamental technology, say in blockchain or even in core banking systems, that's not indigenous to China. So I think in the short and medium term, China will definitely suffer from that. Only about 12 companies in the world now can make core banking systems. That's literally, if you want to start a bank, you need to have a core banking system that has the ledger and has, they can handle deposits and things like that. Only about 12 companies in the world can make that, and none of that is Chinese. So if people turn that off, it's going to be a bit of a problem for China. And I think I think that kind of thing applies in general. So China will probably suffer in the short and medium term. Now, over the longer term, I think it depends on how the Chinese authorities and how the Chinese leadership tackles the issue. And it also depends on how the U.S. I guess how the U.S. Would implement is overall policy direction of basically blocking the rise of China. I think it's actually very hard to say. I think there will be more conflict, and definitely short and medium term, not a pretty sight. Not a pretty sight. That's my view. Yeah.
Sure. Sam, you want to, talk a little bit about this question?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Amit, what he said, that at the end, it's competition is good. I think when you look at it, though, the US is doing to China what China has been doing to the US for last decade or so. Think about Facebook and Google and all those companies that cannot operate freely in the US and being always facing challenges with China's protectionist approach. So that's what the US is doing to China now. The issue is that I think it's just one of these things where two kids get in a fight, and one says, if you don't stop now, I'm going to do X. It's at the end, it's probably just an empty threat. Let's face it, if the US tries to go and boycott Chinese technologies, the ones that suffer the most are probably the rest of the world. I'll give you an example. The whole issue that was with Huawei a few months ago. And Trump said we have to stop using Huawei and boycott them and all that stuff. If China wants to play that game, and I think Google then kind of had to go along and say, okay, we will stop supporting Android on the Huawei phones. Right? If Huawei wants to play that game, first of all, coming up with their own version of an Android, it takes them probably 2 weeks, right? But beyond that, if they go and play that game and say, oh yeah, okay, well, if that's the case, we're just going to shut down all the Huawei gateways and communication devices that all of you guys are using in your telecommunication systems, Google's data will not go anywhere. So it's a risky game to play. I think it's just a lot of muscle flexing in preparation for the election. We'll have to see what happens in November. At the end, I think the other thing we'll have to keep in mind is that innovation already has shifted to China. And my observation from working, or at least being a few times with China and working with some Chinese companies, and they literally don't need the rest of the world. They can survive with just their own domestic market for a while. Something that the rest of the countries cannot do. Even the US, most of their imports, smart cities, which started in the US, now China exports more smart city technologies to the US. So, IoT and all these things, all these IoT devices that we're talking about, it comes now from China. So if you really want to play that game, you better be prepared. That's going to get really messy. And I don't think it's political, but I don't think companies like Silicon Valley companies would want to go down that path. So we'll see how that goes. If the U.S. government stays in power for another term, it's probably going to get really messy. If not, then it would be just kind of pass over. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Sure, thank you for the answers. And maybe we shift our focus from the tech war going on between the US and China to a more observant trend going on, which is COVID-19. And there is this question, like, what kind of transformations are you guys seeing, or new directions you guys are seeing in the post-COVID-19 world? Maybe in terms of fintech and technology on general level?
Let me start with that one. Terry, I hope you don't mind. Is Amit still there, Amit, or did he drop off already? If he has something to add.
He has dropped off.
He dropped off, okay. All right, so, I mean, we keep referring to it as a new norm, and it's truly the new norm. I'll give you an example from my own experience. So my last job, I was with Intel. We were basically managing the education sector. We go to the ministries of education and all over Asia. We were part of the worldwide team, but I was in charge of Asia. So we go to the Ministry of Education, say, you guys, and universities like yours, and we're saying you really should use technology. There's so much that you can do remotely, e-learning, all that stuff. And technology penetration in education was less than 5% across Asia, right? And it felt a lot of times where we're saying something to them, goes one ear, goes out the other ear. And all it took is that little virus. And suddenly all schools are online. Everybody's going e-learning, everybody's going e-books. I was joking with my ex-colleagues from Intel. I say, this little thing achieved what we couldn't achieve in years. The market, we managed to grow the market, but nowhere near what happened now. So if you look at some of just the PC companies and their results in the last quarter, they're all very, very good because everybody's been buying PCs because they have to work remotely. So is that virus changing the trend? Absolutely. Is it changing the way things are going forward? Completely, because now a lot of companies are realizing, oh, wait a second, working from home or working remotely is doable, and actually it saves money. The risk to regional hubs like Singapore, Dubai, and all those places where that used to be the center and people travel from here to everywhere else, between the limitation on the travel and the fact that work can now be done from anywhere. I can have my workforce now in Indonesia and Thailand and whatever else. I don't have to have them centered in Singapore. I'm going to save a lot of cost, and we're still going to get the results we want. So that's the risk to our economy here, is that where we were a regional hub for a lot of MNCs, you're going to start seeing the shift of those MNCs saying, okay, well, you know what, for the next year and a half, we're going to work from home. So wherever you are, keep working there. And that whole advantage that we have kind of gets weaker. So we'll have to find other ways to be relevant in this environment.
Thank you. Terry, you want to add on anything?
Yeah, so I think I like to say a couple of things. So I agree with Sam partially. So I live in China now, and I've been living in China throughout this entire episode. It's not even a crisis anymore. I think that word's been overused. So I like to bring attention to certain things. During the height of the lockdown in China, if you're in Shanghai or Beijing or even the larger cities, or even the second tier and third tier cities, a lot of people start going online to shop, to entertain themselves, and to do whatever. There was not a single incidence of Alipay or WeChat Pay or Alibaba just going down. You do not hear of any malfunctioning of critical, digital services like food deliveries. I mean, I was not able to get sushi delivered in February, but there's like regular Chinese food. It's not like in other countries when people were really panicking. No, it was even this is like during the real height of the pandemic in Shanghai, when no one really walks out of the apartment, and all that still worked. So from a kind of contingency planning perspective, I think I agree with Sam. Southeast Asia needs, and a lot of the countries in ASEAN, they need to wake up, because China can't operate an entire economy digitally, pretty much. And I don't think, like Indonesia definitely cannot. I think Singapore can, but I wonder how many ASEAN countries can. And I think from a BCP kind of perspective, that's very important. The second, I differ a little bit from Sam, because now we can travel within China. You can fly domestically, and you can go and meet people in Shanghai. Not many places even require you to wear a mask anymore, because they control they can trace your entire track pretty well. But it does highlight the fact that if you cannot travel to places like Singapore or New York, deal making suffers. You can only do so much with Zoom, and I think people do realize that. And I hear bankers, VCs, and PE guys saying, it's just like some deals are just slowing down because I can't fly to Hong Kong and meet this guy. So I think it depends on the industry. So there's both sides to it. So that's my view.
Sure.
I agree with you. There's one more thing I want to add to that, is that I talked about pain points, and I think this is an opportunity in its own way, because it created new pain points for users, and that's an opportunity for entrepreneurs to basically create new solutions. And I would, for a couple of reasons. One, this is what we call the new norm, and second, these pandemics, they used to come every 100 years, then every 20 years, and every 10 years, and now it's like possibly every 5 years. So this is not the end of it. It's going to happen again and again, right? So people have to get used to it, and there'll be a solution that people need regularly, and maybe even better if you can get ahead of it and you have a solution that helps prevent such pandemics in the future.
Sure, thank you. Qijia, any interesting questions from your side?
Yep. Thanks, Terry, Sam, and Amit for making so much insightful sharings and to sharing your views. And here we have an interesting questions about the payment development. So since the launch of Payment Services Act in Singapore recently, do you foresee any further restrictions for the fintech industry? You could share your views on this question.
So since what?
The launch of Payment Services Act in Singapore.
Oh, I think, well, I wouldn't call that restriction. I think it's more, it's basically disciplining the industry. I mean, fintech, if you are moving money around, you have to observe regulation. I mean, that's just, it doesn't matter if you're moving paper money. It doesn't matter if you're doing by telex, like they did so in the 80s. And it doesn't matter if you're doing it on a mobile phone. I think there was a time a few years ago where policymakers and governments and financial institutions were not aware of this new technology. So it was a bit of a Wild West where we're just going back to normal. I think it's not a restriction. I think it's actually very healthy. If you gain a reputation that you can just transfer money haphazardly using these digital methods, proper businesses and proper people will be afraid to use it. You want to inspire, as regulators and policymakers, you do want to inspire confidence. Like, yeah, if you do digital payment in Singapore, it's safe and it is regulated. So I think it's actually a good thing.
Sam, what is your opinion?
That one I couldn't add much more. I'm not the fintech expert by any means. So.
Okay, maybe we can move on to a more general point of view. For example, the technology trends are developed, such as digital payments, telehealth, and robotics. So do you think this acceleration is healthy in a kind of maybe for the whole economy and for the whole world technology development? Or is there any potential backlash for this to happen so suddenly, or somewhat not healthy in your point of view?
Well, as a technologist, I think it is healthy. Like I said earlier, right? What we couldn't achieve in years was done in a matter of weeks. So I think it's just accelerating the adoption of certain technologies that people were hesitant about. Like Terry said earlier, right? Online purchases and buying things online, people realize, well, it's not that bad. Even my parents now can go and buy some things online and feel safer. So I think the only issue there is whenever you're rushing through something, quality one way or another suffers. And when it comes to matters of finance and people's money, if somebody comes up with a solution that's not very robust, that then quickly gets hacked, then there's a risk. And even when we're talking, Zoom, remember in the early days of Zoom, how people were hacking into it and messing up conferences and so on. So that's a risk that you have. But on the other hand, I think that the benefits outweigh the disadvantages.
Sure, thank you. I know we've been talking a lot about pain points in the technology industry, and I think there is this question about the unique pain points Southeast Asia is facing. The person asked about specifically the fintech industry, but I think maybe we could also direct the question to Sam to give a more general perspective on this question.
Sure. Let Terry answer first, and then I'll add my piece.
So which question is that?
Unique pain points Southeast Asia is facing in the fintech industry. I know you give a pretty detailed, answer. Maybe you could.
Oh yeah. So I think. All right. So first, the pain points. First one is talent. It's very hard to find the right combination of talent to understand fintech in Southeast Asia. Not just engineers, but product people. Managing, say, for example, managing a virtual credit card, that's completely digital is very, very different from managing a regular credit card. That kind of talent is lacking. And also at a management level, very few senior bank people across ASEAN can lead a fintech transformation for their institution, or even work with fintech companies. Second is policy. I think that's actually the biggest problem for ASEAN in general, except for Singapore. Singapore is kind of leading on that front. MAS, I do have to praise them. I mean, usually you don't praise regulators, but they're actually pretty good. I mean, they listen to ideas and they really think about what to do, but that cannot be said for many countries. And because of that, you have massive dislocations, right? Because ASEAN is not one country. So a lot of regulators and policymakers in ASEAN countries, they don't really understand the strategic importance of fintech. So what you end up having is a massive dislocation, because as I think Sam alluded to before, Singapore is great, but it's a small country. There are only so many people. The ASEAN market is big, is very big, but once you go outside of Singapore, you face a completely different policy and regulatory environment, and that's very challenging. And startups cannot do this alone. In an ideal world, there should be a coordinated ASEAN effort, but we'll see. And third is scale. As I said, I mean, Southeast Asia is a large market, but it's naturally a cross-border business. And without solving these policy issues, without having a regional kind of regulatory framework, it's hard to implement that across many markets. Now, some of this can be addressed by digital banking, because unlike a startup, which has more challenges going overseas, in the financial space, in other spaces is different. A bank is different. I mean, if I'm a real bank, I have a real banking license from the MAS. I can just say, you know what? I'm going to Thailand. I'm going to open a branch. I mean, it's a real branch. I mean, they can kind of work within a much older, a much more conventional regulatory scheme, and kind of put the technology inside that box, if you will. So that digital banking can partially solve some of this.
I think the pain points that when you're looking at the whole ASEAN market, it is the cross-border issue that as soon as you go out of your country, if you're with your business, you're facing a lot more challenges than, let's say, if you were just in China, which means as an entrepreneur, you have to be very careful which countries you pick next to help you scale and drive the engine to produce more, or at least to bring in more revenues. But at the same time, I think that's also the opportunity for us. When you're looking around the region, so Singapore is quite advanced in many aspects, but you go to, and Malaysia is close, but still not near as close. And then when you go into other countries like Vietnam and Myanmar, Laos, or Indonesia, there's hundreds of millions of people who are just slowly coming out of the level where you just worry about, getting my daily food, and you're getting into the middle class level, and you're becoming consumers who will buy stuff. And that will drive not only those economies, but it will drive also the need for new products. So one simple way would be is you look at things that are working, and let's say in Singapore or in Malaysia, and you go, okay, now let me go and replicate that into Indonesia, etc. Gojek actually went the other way. They started in Indonesia and then they came here, but at the end, Gojek was just another Uber, right? So you could look at some of those solutions, and I would actually look at China and see what kind of solutions they have deployed, and then say, okay, how can I replicate those for the ASEAN market? You will have issues with different languages, multiple languages, etc., but nevertheless, you do have then a bigger market to tap into. The good news for Singaporean entrepreneurs, you do have government agencies who will happily invest in you and fund you if they know that you're doing something unique. I think from my talk with a lot of the startups here, is my concern is a lot of them are just Me Too type of startups. I just want to be another Uber for plumbers, or I want to be an Uber for delivery, or I want to be, there isn't necessarily innovation in that sense of new ideas addressing problems that nobody had tackled. It's just like, oh, I'm going to take something that I've seen work somewhere else, and I'll just copy it here. That's okay. I would look at something that already worked here and then try to copy and replicate across ASEAN.
Sure, thank you. Maybe because due to the time restriction, I think I guess we just wrap up the discussion with one last question, and that question may be more relevant to the audience of this summit, who are students and young entrepreneurs, maybe aspire to develop a career in technology. Can you please share with us, for example, 2 tips that you could offer to our audience for their career development? Thank you.
Terry, do you want to take this one first?
This is tips for students who are is that the question?
For their career
Yes.
development.
Yeah.
I think they're actually, I would say something very, very different. The one tip is actually, this is actually related to a question that was asked online. Study humanities. I mean, I don't care if you're a coder, you're a mathematician, you're a finance guy, study humanities. If the whole world is run by machines and technocrats, humanity would end. All right, so that's one reason. And second, within humanities, you should really look into history, because yes, technology is a driving force for a lot of things, but then the other massive driving force is political power, and political power, unlike technology, is very irrational. And if you don't know what that means, just look at the White House right now, and you don't understand the behavior of the White House by studying machine learning or mathematics, because it's not rational. It's based on very, very human kind of drives and motivations. And I think in our world, it's very important to understand that context, even when you're applying technology. So yeah, so Sam, that 2 cents for me.
Very interesting. That's not something as a technologist I would ever look at, but I think it makes perfect sense. So yeah, maybe I should take a couple courses in humanities and history. Thanks for that tip, Terry. Couple of things I would suggest. First of all, don't just chase the money. And I'm saying when you're looking at a product, that you're just looking at how much money can I make. There's always opportunities there, but make sure that you pursue something that you have personal interest and passion in. Each one of us is wired for something, whether it's helping people or making things or whatever. And if you pursue that passion, you'll be much better, much more successful in your job and your career than just doing something else. You know, everybody in my days, their parents wanted them to be a doctor or an engineer, and that's what we all end up doing. And I can't tell you how many of my friends, doctors, who have never, faced a single patient because that was not their passion. They just did it because that was the end thing, or something, because they could do it. So only do what you really have passion for. I always say, do what you love and love what you do, and success and money and all that stuff will follow. And don't let others tell you how to live your life. They mean well, but they only know it from their own perspective. Follow your heart, follow your passion. If you say, well, Sam, I don't know what my passion is, very simple. Have you ever worked on something and for hours and then you look up and it's all dark? That's your passion. Go and do something in that area, and you will be much more successful than anybody else. And you look at the people like Bill Gates and all those guys, and they had passion in what they're doing, right? So pursue your passion, do what you love, and love what you do.
Sure. Thank you, Terry and Sam, for the useful tips. I guess once again, we would like to express our appreciation to the guests for your time and knowledge shared. And I believe tonight has been a wonderful and a fruitful learning journey for all of us here. Also, I personally want to take this opportunity to thank our organizing committee. Without your time, your effort, and coordination, it won't be possible for us to hold this event in this special setting during the global pandemic period. And with that, this marks the end of today's technology and innovation session. For tomorrow, we will be hosting speakers from finance and investments, as well as the new normal speaker series. So we look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow. And good night, everyone. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.